Welcome, Money Talkers. I have a special treat for you guys today. I have one of the top business podcasters in the world on Money Talkers today. I have Crider. He's a 20-year-old. Get that, 20-year-old, working on graduating college in 2.5 years. But he is better known as the host of Young Smart Money. This is a top 100 business podcast for young entrepreneurs. And recently, Apple even went as far to open up his own podcasting space to start in Podblade. It's a low-cost podcast editing company known for their $20 podcast edits. Apple's very passionate about making people aware of the multitude of alternatives that exist outside of the traditional life path. I am very excited to have him on the show. Apple, if you don't mind saying hi.
Sure thing, Cody. I'm excited to join you and all the Money Talkers on this episode.
Well, fantastic, man. I want to dive right in with you. I'm extremely excited to talk to you. What you've done in such a short amount of time is, nothing but amazing to me. I'm also a fan. I listen to the podcast. I see the guests you get. I'm just excited to talk to you about it as Money Talk is growing, and I know that our audience will be able to find this extremely interesting. I think what I'd really like to ask you about to get started is, how did you decide to do this? Like, what was the aha moment that you were like, you know what, I'm just going to put myself out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, so recently, actually, I just graduated from college, honestly, like less than a week ago. So
oh man,
that's
congrats.
big development. Thank you. But so during college, when I first got to school, I was really just not jazzed about the whole experience. I wasn't stoked about being there. And the reason for that in hindsight was like, I didn't really understand that you could study something that you were passionate about. I just like didn't put those two things together, which I don't really know why that didn't click for me. But basically I was just studying stuff that I didn't really enjoy that much. And so I wasn't enjoying life that much. So I sort of took to YouTube and kind of just like was Googling like, what can I do to like fill my time with that's actually enjoyable? And so I stumbled into the world of like online businesses. And over the span of like a year, I was really trying everything under the sun, all the sort of like cookie cutter businesses you see Facebook ads promoting. So like I was trying to sell stuff on Amazon. I was doing like the social media marketing, running Facebook ads, doing Instagram. So I was doing all these like social media businesses. Eventually, that led me to being interviewed on my local college radio station. They were like, yo, this kid's doing some cool stuff, making a little bit of money online. That's pretty cool. So let's bring him on the radio. So I ended up going on the radio. I'd never done an interview before. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, why do people actually want to talk to me? Like, I don't really think I had that much stuff to say, but they took me on the radio and got to sit down with some radio DJs for like 30, 45 minutes and just sort of like chat it up, tell them about what I was working on and stuff. And so that kind of introduced me to the world of like interviews. And just I was by the end of that interview, I was like, dang, that was really cool. Like, I want to do more of that. So then I kind of just went back to YouTube. I was like, how do I interview people? And then I stumbled into the world of podcasting. Prior to launching my own show, really didn't even know what a podcast was. So about 4 or 5 days later, ended up launching my own show. And that's sort of how it all got started. But yeah, it was really just me not being super satisfied, content, whatever with college, and just needing something to do to kind of to keep engaged, keep interested, and find something that really caught my attention.
I can totally relate with that. And I also love the fact that you took that initiative and went and educated yourself and said, well, how do I do this? And you just went and said, man, I can go find out. Like,
Yep.
a lot of people will stop and say, I can't do this. And for me, one of the biggest mindset changes you can have is changing the word I can't to how do I?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's so cool that you went onto YouTube and just said, well, I want to do this. How do I do it? And you just start watching and educating yourself, man. That's
Straight up. I mean, my
awesome.
top two mentors, I always say Google search bar, YouTube search bar. Those are my two top mentors right there. Like you can learn so much. Like there is such a wealth of information out there that like, if you have the initiative, if you just have an idea, like you can figure out how to execute on it. If you just take a couple hours on a Saturday and just learn, like just take some time, learn about some stuff, and then just start doing it.
Yeah, I kind of blew my wife's mind one time. I took apart our flat screen TV because I was watching a YouTube video and because it blew out and I put it back together. I was so excited. But anyway, so let me ask this: how did you decide on a financial such a young age, like how did you decide on not just doing like whatever's hottest trend here and there? Like your podcast really dives into like personal financial success, and
Yeah.
then like how did you end up on that?
Yeah, so I like prior to getting to school, I'd always been pretty fascinated with money. From a very young age, I kind of realized that money was going to be a very integral part of my life, whether I wanted it to be or not, just kind of through observing my parents, my peers, the people around me, and just kind of seeing like, I can remember from a very young age, like observing my mom and like how she would spend money, interact with money. And so that sort of just watching that and observing that kind of gave me this interest. And I'd also at the same time been working part-time jobs since I was about 12. My uncle owns a campground, so basically, as soon as I was old enough to stand behind a cash register, he had me work in the little store down there. And so I was making a little bit of money during the summers, putting that away. I'm a big saver, not really a spender. So by the time I got to like 16, 17 years old, I had a fair bit of money saved up just from working for the past 4 or 5 summers. And so I kind of realized I was like, I'm sure there's something better that I could be doing with this money besides just letting it sit in this savings account, earning like 0.05% interest, getting a couple pennies a year. Like I'm sure there's something better out here. So that was sort of when I took to YouTube as I do, and I just searched like what to do with my money. And so that kind of brought me down the whole personal finance rabbit hole at the age of like 16, 17. Started learning about Roth IRAs, started learning about building credit, budgeting, investing. And so that all of that stuff was just, I was so hooked on that I just started telling all of my friends about how cool all of this stuff was, like Roth IRAs, compound interest. I was like, this stuff is so cool. And as most 17-year-olds do, they were like, dude, you're like, this is stupid. Like, why do I need to know this stuff? I'll think about that when I'm like 38 years old. So I was like, I'm so passionate. I'm reading all these books. I'm learning all this stuff. Nobody wants to listen to me. So I'm just going to make some YouTube videos. So I took to YouTube and I just started like putting stuff out there. Really just as a creative outlet more than anything. I was just like making videos about like, hey guys, I opened up a Roth IRA. Here's what I'm investing in. Here's why I did that. And then just sort of like documenting like what happened. So I'm like, hey, I applied for this new credit card. This is what happened to my credit score. These are all the factors of your credit score, and kind of just like sharing some basic financial information, and then also giving like my experiences, because like I wasn't really positioning myself as an expert, because obviously I was like 17, maybe 18 years old at the time. So I'm no financial guru, but I was basically just like, hey, here's what I did, here's what happened. So if you do something similar, chances are something similar might happen to you. So that was sort of what I was doing there, and so I was doing that for quite a bit of time actually. So probably about maybe a year before I launched my podcast is when I started doing YouTube. So that was where the whole personal finance interest came in, and all the while, I mean, yeah, it was really just a creative outlet for me to put the stuff out there. And I was like, hey, if you guys want to learn about this stuff, I'm making some videos. You can go watch them. If you don't, no worries. I'm just kind of doing this for me. So that was sort of where I first got that spark on personal finance.
Man, that's you said my two favorite words, which are compound interest. The first time I saw that, I was 19, and my eyes lit up. I literally changed my college major like on the spot. I was like, "What?" And I had that aha moment. It was like as soon as I saw it, I just went, "What is this?" And then
Yeah.
I got the same bug, and then nobody wanted to talk to me about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, a
uh,
compound interest calculator, man. When I first found
yeah,
one of those and just started like putting numbers in, my mind exploded. I was like, if I do this for 40 years, I'll have how many $1 million? Like, this is crazy stuff. So, like,
yeah.
I don't know. I still show my friends like compound interest calculators when they'll like listen to me, and sometimes I can just like watch their brain explode, because it's so wild.
To me, I honestly truly believe this. Any kid in America can be a millionaire. It just you literally need from I think it's like 16 to 66. If you put $40 a month away, it's $10 a week. Like
Yep.
you got to figure that out. But it's like it's just compound interest blows up over $1 million. Like it's just,
Yep.
but we don't teach these things in school. And to me, it's a tragedy that we're not explaining these things, because the first time I saw it, I was actually in college, and I remember being angry about the kids I knew that were never going to see this information. And today we're in a little bit different world because of the ability to go out and self-educate with YouTube and podcasts and things. Like it's amazing to see where you're at where I had a lot of the same feelings, but I didn't have a lot of the same accesses. And so I think what you're doing is fantastic. And so that's what we want to do with Money Talkers is to bring that education to help parents talk to their kids about these things. And I just, I'm curious as from, because of that background where you can now self-educate, like, where did you find your influences? Like, what were the things that like got you, who got you going? Like, because I know for me who it was. Like, I
Yeah.
remember, but I'm just curious, like, if you
Okay.
have a YouTube version of it, or what you went out and found.
Yeah, so really, it's funny now because all of the people who I was initially learning from are now all really good friends of mine. Just through all of the connections I've been able to build through the space, all the events that I've been going to, been doing work for some of these guys. So the big one though has been a guy named Ryan Scribner. I think he's got like 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. So he's doing pretty well for himself. He makes a lot of investing videos. But yeah, him and I are very good friends now. We've been on multiple vacations together and just travel around a lot. So he's a really good friend of mine. But he was somebody who I've been learning from for like, he was one of the first people that I ever found, was learning from him for a couple of years. And then, started building a relationship with him. So that's been really cool. Graham Steffen, another guy who is doing a lot of cool stuff. Been able to meet him a couple times as well. Really, really cool dude. So those two are definitely like the two biggest influences on me, I believe, in terms of personal finance. Also, Chelsea Fagan from the Financial Diet, also somebody who I've met at a couple events, and she's super, super cool. But yeah, she was a really big influence as well. I'm pretty sure that channel's got a lot of press now. So those are kind of the big three, though. I mean, all of those people just put out really, really good information when it comes to investing, Roth IRAs, credit cards, all that good stuff. So, and honestly, like, I'm somebody who doesn't like to complicate things that don't necessarily need to be complicated. So like, as long as I understand like what all the moving pieces are, like I don't need to go super, super, super in depth on things. Like if I have a good understanding of it, like I'm fine to just like start taking action and sort of see what happens. I don't need to understand. Like I think this is something actually pretty generational. Like people in my generation, like people who are like, I don't know, like 25 and under, like we don't necessarily need to understand how a thing works. Like if our phone works and it does the things that we need it to do, we don't need to understand like all of the gizmos and gadgets and programs running on behind the scenes. Whereas like people from my parents' generation, like they need to like take things apart and like figure out like, oh, like how does this work and how does this happen? Whereas like people in my generation don't really need to know that. So that being said, that's kind of how I look at a lot of things. As long as like I understand like what processes are going on and like kind of how they're happening and why they're happening, like I don't need to see like all the little bits and pieces and everything. So I sort of take that with me into personal finance as well. Like as long as I understand like the big macro concepts and I can convey those to people in a way that's easy to understand, I don't feel the need to overwhelm people with all of like crazy like additional like details and little minuscule things here and there, because a lot of times that just it intimidates people. People get scared. They don't do anything. So I like to focus on like big picture stuff and then like let people dig into the areas that they really want to dig into if they want that additional information. So that's kind of my whole MO behind personal finance.
I think one of the things to focus on, because I believe what you're saying is I feel the same way, is that people will get lost in the details,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times people will say, oh, you should save money, like as a principle, right? But if you took the extra time and said, okay, these are the results you're going to get. It's kind of what you're talking about. Like, how do
Yep.
you, like, you don't need to know how your phone works. You just need to know that if I do this, this happens,
Yep.
right? And so
Exactly.
if you look at the end results and you have a goal in mind, and you just talk about those goals, because that's literally step one, like where people don't talk about money because they see it as a taboo subject, they don't want to learn about it, they're frustrated, whatever it is. Like if you just said, hey, you know what do you want when you retire? Okay, we'll use that one, right? Or what kind of car do you want to drive? Or what kind of house, what kind of neighborhood do you want to live in? Like, okay, how do I get there? And you lay out some steps. It's a lot easier to follow than just saying, hey, you know what, get a good job and study hard and save money, and it's like
Yeah.
that part where, so I have a question. So like, where would you recommend that that someone, 16, 18, 20, that, where would you recommend that parents help their kids go to places to find that information? Like, would you go back to YouTube? Would you go? I mean, I follow Graham as well. I think his stuff's fantastic. It's straightforward.
Yeah.
Is that still the same places that you feel that you would recommend, or how would they would get started?
Yeah, I think YouTube's a great place to get started. Also, I one of the books that I read right when I was getting started was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and that book's just a classic. Honestly, like you can pick that up on Amazon for like less than $5, I think. And that book really just does do a really good job at introducing a lot of the basic concepts through this whole narrative, which is a really good vehicle, I feel, for conveying these financial concepts in a way that's easy to understand if you don't have any background. So I think that book is a really, really good place to start. Again, super cheap on Amazon. Would totally pick that book up and give it to your kid if that's something that you think would, if you want to get them interested in the topic. Because it really, yeah, it does a good job of like sparking interest and yeah, just conveying some things like compound interest and like the power of investing in assets and stuff that isn't taught in schools and isn't something that you're likely to just like naturally pick up on your own if you don't have some kind of like structured resource for it. So I would start with that book, and then again, I would start with YouTube too. Just honestly, like looking up like stock market for beginners or like investing basics or whatever. And there's so many good resources out there. I mean, the channels that I named, I think they're still putting out really good content. But yeah, there's just such an abundance of information out there that like whether your kid would rather watch videos, which they probably would, or like read some blogs, or I mean even podcasts. Like there's a ton of really valuable personal finance podcasts that'll get you the basics and then some that are all completely free. Like there's just so much free information out there that I'm so stoked to be living in the year that I'm living in. Honestly, like it's crazy to just see like how much stuff we have at our fingertips, and like thinking about my grandparents and what they had. Like if they wanted to learn about personal finance, like they had to first learn the Dewey Decimal System so they could show up at the library and like figure out where anything was. And like there's just all this stuff that they had to go through, all these hoops they had to jump through. And for us, it's literally you just pull out your smartphone and like you have it all. Like you have everything there. There's no reason why you can't learn about anything that you want to learn about. So I'm just, yeah, I mean, just go to YouTube, go to blogs, go to podcasts. Like there's just so much good info out there. I mean, it's crazy.
So my YouTube in college, my influencer was that book.
Really?
That was the first like financial book I'd ever read. I read at the same time I took the finance class, and I actually had a conversation with a stockbroker at a random place, and we talked for like 2 hours, and then he just gave me the book, and I'm like, I don't want to read this, and I'm like, whatever. I started reading it, and I mean, it changed my whole perspective.
Yeah.
On basically like everything. I mean, all about money. That flipped the switch for me. That one book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the concept of assets and liabilities. You know, what they truly are. You know,
Yeah.
and then compounding that income and learning about passive income, and then learning about compounding, and it's like it sounds a lot more technical as I'm saying it right now, but if you read the book, this is the best introduction you can have into these concepts, because it lays it out in such a simple concept, and then you see the results of over time. And so,
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, I want to thank you. So that kind of puts up our part one, and so I want to thank you for that. I want to take a quick break, and then what we're going to do is we're going to set up for a part two, where I really want to dive into what you're doing now. Just because I've got the opportunity to talk to somebody that's out there doing it in the podcast world. So if you guys want to catch more with Apple and myself, we'll be back on episode 2. All right, welcome back, Money Talkers. This is episode 2 with one of our very special guests. We've got Apple Crider here. Hopefully, you picked up on episode 1 and you learned a lot. You got some of the background and the influences and some of the things that have really driven him to seek, financial literacy, financial freedom, success, learning about money. We've got a very unique perspective because of what he's done and his age. And so I want to make sure that as parents out there that you're able to look into, someone at Apple's age and say, you know what, man, this is the things that we need to be pushing our kids into, and not really pushing, but kind of just exposing them to, because once you have that exposure to, what the results could be if you learn these things, I really feel that the spark just starts, and we're in that self-education era. And so if you can start the spark with some of the resources that he's given you, and then that's all you're going to do to change the trajectory of your kid's life. And it doesn't take a lot to change the trajectory, And so I want to jump into this section with you in a little bit more and talk about what you're doing with your podcast, because I also find that that's extremely interesting, because what you've been able to do, and just kind of talk to you a little bit more about the results, and what how you're monetizing, and how you're getting guests, and what you're what you're feeling out there, and what you're seeing, and how to get started. So if you don't mind, Apple, if you could tell us a little bit about just basically about your podcast and where you're at today, and some of the people you've been able to talk to, and I'll let you
Yeah.
take it from there.
Straight up. Well, thanks again for having me on, Cody. I really appreciate it. So yeah, like you mentioned, my podcast, it's called Young Smart Money, and basically it's kind of mixing my two biggest passions, which are personal finance and entrepreneurship. So I wanted to basically create a place where I could sit down with top of the line entrepreneurs, people who are doing really cool stuff, creating really cool things, and just sort of hear either what they were doing in the personal finance realm, or just sort of like how their financial situation worked, being an entrepreneur. As I just graduated from college a few days ago, so I am now doing entrepreneurship full time. So getting that information, it has always been of interest to me. So that's basically the show. And yeah, basically where we're at right now, we've been in the top 100 on iTunes for the business section multiple times. I think we've been in the top 100 overall a few times as well. So it's been really, really cool to sort of see the thing grow. I've been doing it for about 2 years. So there's definitely been some hours that have been put in. We've got probably close to 300 episodes right now, at least over 250 for sure. Probably closing in on 300. And so yeah, I've been able to sit down with some really, really cool top of the line entrepreneurs, people who've got 9-figure real estate empires, Grammy award winning rappers, Patrick Bet David, who's got this YouTube channel called Valuetainment that's got, I don't know, 1 million subscribers or so. Graham Stephan, like we mentioned in episode 1. So really cool people who are doing really cool stuff. And so it's just been so enjoyable to be able to pick their brains and hear firsthand like what they've been up to in the personal finance space, and like building their own businesses. So that's kind of overarching what I'm doing over there. And yeah, like we mentioned in episode 1, that really just came about as a result of me being interviewed on my local college radio station about 2.5 years ago now.
So I have a question for you. Have you noticed, have you, I don't know, noticed any similarities when you talk to these people that are in these, that have had the success that they've had? Do are there any things, commonalities that you're starting to see between them?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've definitely picked up on is just how much importance people place on their time. So when I compare like the people who I'm talking to on the podcast, like one thing that really stands out is like these people put a lot of importance on their time and where it goes. They're very protective of their time, and they're not just throwing around their time willy-nilly. They realize that their time is their most valuable resource, and so they're putting that premium on their time. So that's definitely the number one thing that stands out. Like every person that I've talked to, it's very clear that they are putting a very high value on their time, and yeah, they're not just spending their time in ways that they don't find meaningful.
That's really interesting. One of the things, I was a commercial banker for a little while, and I when I went in, there were a lot of different businesses, and this is 08, 09, 2010, right? So like the
Wow.
worst time ever to be in
Yeah.
business. And I would have a lot of people ask me, and they'd say, hey, what business should I be in? Because a lot of people were looking at that time, like, searching for answers basically. And I would tell people it didn't matter. And they would say, well, what do you mean? And I said, it doesn't matter what business you're in. I said, because I have everybody from a sand digger to massive doctor groups, and doctors, for example, half of them have terrible credit and no money management skills. And they're just, they're stressed, and they're not running good businesses, even though they're good doctors. And it's like, you start to see some patterns in business owners. And I agree with you. They have a purpose, and then they know their numbers, was what I found a lot of times. I found these commonalities in these. And so it's interesting to hear you say that they guard their time well. And I wonder if that feeling comes to you from them speaking with a purpose of what they're doing with their time.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that definitely does tie in because, um, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why they're so protective of their time is because they do have this stronger why and this sort of purpose driven approach to everything where like they know where they're going and they know that they're going to need a lot of time to get to that place. So if they want to get there as fast as possible, they're going to have to invest as much time as possible right now. So I think that's definitely why they're not just protecting their time for the heck of it, but they know where they're going and they know why they want to or how they want to use this time. And so being able to do that effectively is kind of, I think, the driver there.
So I got a big question for you.
Okay.
How are you getting these guys to come on to your podcast? Like, how did you, is it, I mean, obviously now that you're so, you know, where you're at and you're established and the things you've been able to do with it,
Hmm.
but like, in the beginning, like, how were you, were you nervous to approach them? Were you just all out? Like, I'm shooting my shot. I don't care. Like, are you like, what happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first, I would say like 6 or 7 episodes of the podcast were just me doing my own thing, talking about like personal finance stuff. And so that, yeah, I had my first guest probably about a couple weeks in. And that happened as a result of me going to an event called FinCon, which it's this conference for people who create financial content, whether it's podcasts, blogs, YouTube, whatever. So I went to this event and met some really, really cool people. So I had gotten a scholarship to the event actually because I've been creating content for less than a year. So if you're a new content creator, they actually have this scholarship program. They give out like 50 scholarships to people who have been doing it for less than a year. I applied for one of those, got it. And then I went to Orlando, went to this conference and met some really cool people. So that was kind of the springboard because I was at this event. There were so many cool speakers talking about cool personal finance stuff that afterwards, like I would just walk up to them and I'd be like, hey, my name's Apple. At the time I was probably like 18. I was like, I'm 18 years old, just started a cool podcast. And I would love it if you'd be a guest on the show. And so many of them were like, yeah, sure, I'll be a guest. Like, of course, like you came to this event, you saw me speak, like, of course I'll be a guest on your podcast. So that was a really good way for me to get my foot in the door. And then like once I had those initial connections, I could then leverage those to sort of springboard off of. But beyond that, it's really just all been reaching out through Instagram for the most part, like Instagram and a little bit of LinkedIn, but pretty much all Instagram. And there's really not that much to it, to be honest with you. Like for me, it really just comes down to thinking about like, okay, first of all, what do those people want? Like what are they looking for? Like how can I provide value to them? But two, like you got to put yourself in the shoes of them and be like, okay, what are the messages that I'm getting every single day? Because most of these people that I'm talking to, they're getting hundreds, if not multiple hundreds of DMs every single day on Instagram. So like you have to sort of think about how can you stand out from all of those messages they're getting? Like how can you be different enough to actually get them to one, open your message and two, respond to it. So that's sort of a game that I like to play too, and just sort of thinking about like, okay, how can I provide this person value and how can I show them that I can provide them value in such a way that they actually open my message in the first place. So it really just comes down to usually I'm sending video messages. So I'm just pulling up my phone, recording a quick like 15-second video being like, yo, Cody, my name's Apple. I host a top 100 podcast called Young Smart Money. Would love to have you on the show, talk about X, Y, and Z. If that's something you're interested in, let me know. Something like that, super simple, but video messages get opened a lot more, I find, just because it shows a little personal touch. You could also try voice messages. Those work pretty well too. But it's just finding ways to make yourself unique, stand out, make a good first impression. Because, I mean, if you're just sending them the same copy pasted message that you're sending everyone, I mean, it's never going to get to them. They're never going to open it. And if they do, they're going to be like, this guy doesn't really care that much. So find a way to make yourself unique and find a way to actually provide them with value too. Don't just think about yourself, think about them, because everybody's just out there thinking about themselves. So if you can show them, because they are thinking about themselves, how it will benefit them, that's gonna get them to be much more likely to actually come on your show.
Yeah, that's a very strategic way to think about that, and that's impressive. That's a super gold nugget there for people out there that are thinking about doing these things. Is that you've got to stand out, and you've got to begin with the end in mind of being able to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to bring value to you too. And
Yep.
it can't just be a selfish.
No.
It's got to be win-win. It can't be
Yeah.
win-lose and lose-win. It's got to be win-win. If you think that way, that's a huge gold nugget for people out there that want to. They're thinking about doing something like this and getting out there. And for me personally,
Yeah.
as Money Talkers grows, that I'm making notes over here while I'm talking to you. So, I want to say thanks for that. And so,
Yeah.
where did you start out thinking that the podcasting would be a business for you? Like, did you start with an end goal on it, or did you want to just start to get your voice and your message out there and see where it went?
No, it was honestly just kind of another way for me to reach people with the content that I was putting out on YouTube because, like I said, I've been doing YouTube for like a year. And so, I mean, that was just a creative outlet for me. And I was like, well, I could probably reach more people if I went on audio too, because maybe some people would just find me there or would only prefer to listen to audio. So that's sort of why I started and was just doing pretty similar stuff on both platforms, repurposing a lot of stuff between the two. So that was sort of why I started the podcast. There wasn't really an end goal. I never really thought it would make money. Turns out it did, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, I didn't really have a vision or anything in mind for sort of making money off it or anything.
So, are you finding now that because I mean, I've heard amazing stats on the opportunities available in podcasts these days, and I've also heard amazing stats on the actual listeners on podcasts because their average salaries are something like 150% over what the usual average U.S. salaries are, and I think that comes from people seeking out information is a character trait. Like when you talked about you want to learn about finance, go on YouTube, and like
Yeah.
you go out and you go get it. So that becomes kind of a character. So I hear people that are getting podcasts is exploding, and there's a lot of ground floor level stuff going on right now. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are. Not only just because I think you do have amazing guests and you do have strategy behind that, but how do you decide like who do you want to bring to your audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the beginning, I was kind of a lot more just like willy-nilly about it, and I was just trying to talk to people who I thought were cool or like. And there was a point too where I was doing one podcast a day, which was just ridiculous because at that point it was just really, really hard for me to like adequately research people. So now that I've slowed down a bit to doing about two a week, it's been a lot easier for me to make sure that the people that I do bring on the show are high quality and people that I think could bring a lot of value to the audience. But for me, it really comes down to thinking about like, okay, who is my audience and what would actually benefit them, and then also like, what do I want to learn? Like, what stage am I in my business, and what person or who can I talk to that has the information that can help me with this current stage? So those are sort of the two factors that go into it. I also like to prioritize local people. So in sort of the podcasts that are going to be coming out in January, I've really prioritized doing interviews in person because there's so many cool people locally that aren't on like the huge scale of like some of these social media influencers, but are doing some really cool stuff, running some really cool businesses. So I like to prioritize local as well, just especially because like sitting down in person is so different from like a Zoom interview. Like Zoom interviews are great, but like sitting down with someone in person and actually like meeting them and getting to know them on a more personal level is something that I really value. So been doing more of that, but it's really just like, yeah, who are the cool people around me, or that I know of that are doing cool stuff. Whenever I have guests on the show, I'll always ask them like, yo, who do you know that's doing cool stuff? I'd love to talk to them. So it's really just, it's through word of mouth, and it's just anybody who I genuinely look up to, I'm going to hit them up and I'm going to ask them to do an interview because I want to pick their brain. I want to learn from them. I want to see what kind of gold nuggets they can share with the listeners. So that's sort of my strategy or just like my thought process behind like the people that I bring on the show. But it's not super structured. Like I don't plan things out like months in advance. It's really just like, who are the people that I'm currently learning from? And I want to bring them on so that the listeners can learn from them, but also I can learn from them on a deeper level.
That's awesome, man. Because that's a lot of the things I say will be a result of the average of your 5 friends, but it's right now, I think you can actually take that to the next level and say you're going to be the results of the people that you follow, you talk to, that you can copy success. And I think that's the thing is like a lot of people think it's very unattainable, but I really believe it's just you start to do the things like you're talking about drawing out the info from people who have done successful things. One of the things that I found about people who have had success in their lives, a lot of times they're a lot more willing to share that information than you think.
Yep.
They're actually a lot of times happy that someone's even asking them about it because nobody talks to you about it, you know. Like you want to tell people because you want more for other people, you know. A lot of times it's a big personality trait of people that because they have to be someone who's brought a lot of value to have a lot of success, and so they have that mindset a lot of times. And I think that's really cool that that's kind of how you're seeking out the people that you're talking to is, you know, who do you want to learn from, you know, because and you get this, you're using this medium as an opportunity to go talk to people, to pick their brains, to get their most successful tips and tricks out of them. And that's pretty awesome. That's really awesome. So the next question I have for you is like what are ways that you're, I guess even for you or just in general, like people are monetizing podcasts in general these days right now?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch. I made this this sort of like guide that outlines like I think 16 of them, which is on my website somewhere. I don't know the exact URL, but if you just go to applecrider.com or Cody, I can shoot it to you afterwards. But I made this whole like sort of comprehensive sheet. It's like 30 pages long. It's crazy. But I made that. But basically, like to highlight some of them, I mean, obviously sponsorships are huge. And like if you listen to like the big shows, I mean, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, these guys have 5+ minutes of sponsors on their shows. So that's a decent way to make money if you have a lot of listeners.
I want to ask you one thing on that though.
Yeah.
So just because I'm a how person, like, so
Mhm.
let's say you wanted a sponsor, you're a
Yep.
guy that you're you know, you're a listener right now, you're 18 years old, you're like, man, I'm inspired, I want to go do what Apple's doing, right? And then
Mhm.
like he's like, okay, I'm gonna start, and he starts going, and he says, okay, well, he says get sponsors, like, how do I do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, you realistically, you're not going to be able to get any sponsorships unless you're getting, I would say minimum like 3,000 to 5,000 downloads an episode. And that's just because sponsors, they don't want to, they'd rather sponsor a few big shows than like a ridiculous amount of small shows. So you kind of have to have a decent following first. If you're not at that stage yet, and your podcast host potentially might offer some kind of sponsorship deals. Like I know if you use Anchor, what they basically do is they have sponsors come to them and they'll be like, yo, I want to get 100,000 downloads on this ad. Anchor will be like, I want to get 100,000 downloads on this ad from people who are personal finance podcasters. Anchor will look at their database of podcasters, be like, okay, this guy gets 1,000 an episode, this guy gets 500, this guy gets 250, whatever. And they sort of just add it all up, and then they pay you whatever 75% of what the sponsor is paying them. So you can get sponsors that way with a smaller audience. Generally, it's not that worth it though, because I mean, CPMs, which basically stands for like cost per mil, or how much money you're going to be getting per 1,000 downloads on a certain ad, is usually between like the $20 to $30 range. So if you're only getting 1,000 downloads on an episode, you have one ad on it, you're maybe getting $25 for that episode, which I mean, in the grand scheme, $25 is like, I don't know, it's not really going to make the difference usually. So that's kind of why you need to have more listeners to make that a real viable option. And then you have to potentially layer multiple sponsors into a single episode, which it kind of depends on what you're going for with your podcast. For me personally, I have never put a sponsor on my show. It's just not something that I haven't found a company or a cause or organization that I really feel like having them sponsor my podcast would bring significant value to my listeners. I've been certainly approached by plenty, and some of them are more, I don't know, potentially good options than others, but I just haven't found a good one yet. I'm not totally against it, but I would need to find a really good potential partner to do that with. So that's sort of how sponsors work. And again, you can either, if you don't have a host, an audio or a podcast host that does that for you, you can just reach out to companies, or companies will reach out to you if you put your email. Well, your email's automatically in your RSS feed, so they can just scrape that if they want it. But yeah, just reaching out to local companies honestly is a great place to start, and just being like, yo, do you want to sponsor a podcast? Because a lot of times, like the $20 to $30 per 1,000 rate is sort of like industry average. But if you're just working with like a small local business, or somebody who's not spending thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars on podcast ads, that isn't necessarily like the end all be all rate. Like you can kind of set your own rate, and it's kind of just up to the market to determine like if they're willing to pay it or not. So that's sort of how those work. On the other end though, because there's really like two sides of podcast advertising, or podcast monetization rather. There's making money on the front end or the back end, and basically the front end, when I say that, what I mean is like running ads on your show, doing affiliate marketing, basically any way that you're making money based off of the people who are listening to your show. So any services you provide to your listeners, any like info products you sell, whatever, all the things that you're providing to your listeners, versus back-end marketing or back-end monetization, which is making money based off of your guests that you have on the show. So that's more of what I was doing when I was more focused on monetizing my show. Because now I run Podblade full time, which as you mentioned, Cody, is a podcast editing company. So I do that full time, and that's not super relevant to my podcast, which is about entrepreneurship and personal finance. So I don't really tie those together all that much right now. The podcast is kind of more just for building the community and just learning myself. But what I was doing before I started Podblade about a year ago was I was running kind of like a funnel building agency, kind of like a digital marketing agency. But I was doing like Facebook ads, building sales funnels, doing a little bit of email marketing. So I was doing all this stuff for my podcast guests. So basically at the end of the interview, I'd be like, yo, just so you know, I run a digital marketing company. I do sales funnels, Facebook ads. So if you know anybody who is in need, or if you potentially want to talk, just let me know, and we can do that. So I was just doing that after every episode. And then a couple clients here and there, maybe like 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 would take me up on it. I do some work for them. They might refer me some business. And so that was kind of what I was doing before Podblade and monetizing that way.
Awesome. So that's man, that's a really deep dive into how that works, and I appreciate it, because that's the surface stuff that a lot of people, probably feel a little bit confused about in that part of it. And so like, we're getting close here toward the end, but I want to ask you, like, what's next for you? Where is Apple Crider going to take this thing, man? You just graduated, so like the world is there, man. What are you going to do? I love the Podblade idea, by the way. I think it's sorely needed in the industry, and I may be becoming a client here shortly. So, but yeah, I'm curious, man. What do you got now that you did all this in college?
Yep.
So like now, what are you going to do with all this time you've got?
I mean, I've really only got 2 things on the docket right now. The first of which is I'm going on a 10-day silent Vipassana, which is a style of meditation retreat, in about less than 2 weeks, I think. So that's really creeping up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting that you're going on a silent retreat as a podcast host.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have different stages. So yeah, so I'm going to be doing that, which is going to be definitely an experience. I meditate pretty much every day, but not quite for the 12 hours a day that I'm going to be getting over there. So
wow.
That's going to be really exciting. And then after that, I'm headed to Southeast Asia for probably about 3 months. I just have a one-way ticket right now, and I'll kind of figure it out as I go. But I'm headed to Thailand probably for 2 months, and then to Malaysia, and then probably the Philippines. So I'm going to just be bopping around over there, see some cool stuff, hopefully meet some cool people. And so that's all that's on the docket for now. And all the while I'll be just doing my own thing. So I don't really have any I mean, honestly, it's just working on Podblade is the main focus right now, and just scaling that up and continuing to grow. But yeah, I mean, that's all that's on the docket for the moment.
Man, that's so cool though. I think that you see it as like, well, I'm not doing much. It's like, no, I'm just running a top 100 podcast. I've got a full company I'm scaling, and I kind of it's awesome to hear you hear what you're going out there to do and go conquer the world, man. So I wish you the best on that stuff, and I'm looking forward to hearing the journey. I'm sure you're probably going to be documenting stuff, and
for sure,
growing and meeting amazing people and seeing some amazing things, and I'm excited for you. So that's a really cool thing, and I kind of want to wrap it up there. I wish I could talk to you for another 2 hours, man. I think this is it's been a great talk, and I want to say thank you very much. If people are getting out there, guys, go check out Podblade. If you want to get started, it's really low cost. I mean, we're talking, it blew my mind when I went on there and I saw that there's podcast editing down to $20, man, where it starts. And I'm like, this is nothing if you need digital help. So if you want to get started, you want to get out there, first of all, go follow Young Smart Money, go start listening to Apple stuff, and then get out there and go hit Podblade, man, because it is, it's out there for you guys, and podcasts are blowing up right now. So I want to say thank you, man. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Cody. It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.